Am I the only one so far?
Hey Chuck, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed that little tour of your museum. I hope you can give us a bigger one some other time. That's an amazing place you have there.
Well, we can do that. I'm right in a new area right at the moment. We have another event tonight. There's about 100 people running around here, so I went to a quieter place. This is going to be a TV studio that we're in. We call it Studio 8, and there's some interesting cameras here. We got about 5,000. I'm sorry, 5 tons of broadcast equipment dumped on us about 3 weeks ago.
Oh my goodness.
There's well, there's 6 cameras that are working in this room right at the moment. Two 2-inch videotape machines, two 1-inch videotape machines, an RCA color film chain, a whole bunch of other stuff. It's going to take forever to go through all this and figure out what the hell we got, but here we are. So
Really amazing. What a nice problem to have.
yeah, it is. It's really time consuming. I knew this was coming, and it came from a variety of sources. It almost broke my heart. We had a whole bunch of Ikegami monitors. I can later on take us into the control room that we built. There were a whole bunch of brand new Ikegami 9-inch monitors that came from ABC and some other bigger ones too, including a couple I can't pick up. They're that heavy.
Well,
But at any rate, they're still in the box. They had 1993 build dates, stamped on the things,
huh.
and they've never been opened. They came from ABC in New York. It's like, well, gee, you never even opened the
Hmm.
thing.
Amazing.
you know,
Amazing.
I
Oh,
felt
Yeah,
bad about throwing the
Chuck, this
box
is not
away.
in. You're not in Kilgore. They're in a different place.
No, I'm in Kilgore. This is a
Okay,
new room we're working on right now.
new
Um,
room, right?
yeah, this is we call it Studio 8, and maybe you can see a little bit of it here.
Wow,
Uh,
that's impressive.
it's got these are 16 by 9 cameras. Some of them, the pedestals, some of them we had, some of them came from a TV station in Houston. Um, we have a whole bunch of them actually, which is we,
Wow.
we're always sucking wind for something to put cameras on, but all of a sudden we have lots of them. But we'll find something to put on them. Actually, that hasn't been a problem. Somebody yesterday brought us an RCA TK3011/31 camera. It's more or less complete. I mean, it's going to be a big deal to put it together. It came with the lenses, which is a really big deal because finding the lenses for these things is tough. Um,
Wow.
some of these cameras, though, one of them has the one that's right directly behind me. Uh, this one has, it says it's got a Super 70 lens on the thing. And this lens is like a Mount Palomar observatory or something. The 70-to-1 zoom lens. And you can zoom in on a gnat's eyelash with this thing. It's pretty amazing. The camera works. So we've actually built well, before we start this stuff, I'll go wander into the control room that we built. I'm amazed our Wi-Fi is working here, but it is, so I guess that's a good thing. This is the new control room, operator's area. And then back here, none of this existed 3 weeks ago, actually 2 weeks ago. So now you know what I did on my summer vacation, if nothing else. This has been a lot of work. Actually, this room was storage. The building we're in used to be a car dealership, and this room that I'm in right now was was the body shop. And we've been in the building for about 10 years. The museum's been open for 8, I guess. And we've been piling junk up in here forever. I mean, it was full of just stuff. And just cleaning it out took us about 3 weeks. And then we had to paint it and put some curtains up and get the air conditioning to work because it didn't. Behind me is a camera that came from WGBH in Boston. They had 4 of those. We got 4 of them. And then here's an RCA color film chain. I don't know what we're going to do with it, but here it is anyway. And we've got all these other cameras here. Give us something to do if nothing else.
Well,
So, we're having fun.
all you need is the transmitter. You can actually go on the air, right?
Well, actually, we do have one. Somebody
You have a
gave us
transmitter? You're right.
somebody gave us a low power UHF TV transmitter. Boy, we
Wow.
could start our own channel. I don't know what in God's name we're going to do with that, because it's analog. Nothing can pick it up. But well, actually, old TVs, I guess, can. So there you go.
Wow.
Well, I'm going to see if I can balance my cell phone on this pedestal that's so conveniently located right here. So anyway, we've been having a lot of fun here. You need to come see us. And if you want to bring some tools, we can keep you really busy. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm just trying to figure out how to see everybody.
I haven't figured that out either on my cell phone, but
That's all right. I don't need to. I don't need to.
I got all there's little icons on here. I have no idea what they mean, but I do know that if I touch the wrong one, I'm gone.
Right.
That's a lot of fun. I won't be able to hang into for the whole meeting tonight because we have about 100 people. Once again, we're doing yet another high school reunion. This is the class of 1974. And if the term a lack of planning on your part doesn't constitute a crisis on my part comes to mind, this is the class for it, Oh well, they're good people and they're having a nice time. So
Good. Yeah, I can't figure it out how to. All I can see is who's talking, but this will work, I guess.
yeah, all I can see is you and a little tiny square of me, but it works. So
I got the same thing, right?
okay. Yeah,
Dave, are you on?
I am.
Oh, now
There
I
you
see you. Okay. Well, it works. Well, as usual, let's wait a couple more minutes. It looks like we've only have 17 participants so far. So let's wait till 5 after to get started.
For me, I don't know how to mute my microphone on this thing. There's no little mute switch. It must be there.
It's all the way over. If you scroll over at on the bottom, you'll find mute on the far left. At least on my phone.
Yeah, because my microphone's unmuted. If I slide. Done speaking. Still says my microphone's unmuted, no matter which. You can mute me.
Well, you managed to shut your camera off, Chuck.
I'm sorry, I heard 2 of you at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm using a very nice Vinton camera dolly right now to hold my cell phone in place. So I think it might be interesting to have an iPhone holder put on a $50,000 camera dolly. And it probably makes better pictures than the cameras that were on it.
Yeah, I wish we had the space to do events. We've had a couple, but it's really, we don't have a large room. The only room that's sort of large is the American pre-war room, and you get more than 15 people in there, and it's crowded.
Well, it's crowded here. We got 100 people here tonight.
That'll do it.
Well, next week we have the Texas Radio Hall of Fame's annual induction ceremony, and that's 200 disc jockeys locked up in the place
Wow.
for several hours, and they're all talking in their radio voice, of course, and
Right.
it's festive to say the least.
Right.
This is one of the ways we help finance the museum. So
Right. That makes sense.
but it's a pain in the neck, I can tell you that. I mean, because you get people who have no clue what they're doing, and like the people tonight just discovered that the place they're going to do their supposedly doing their catering, they don't deliver. They just will have the food ready for you to pick up. So now somebody has to go pick the food up. You think you could have figured that out a few weeks in advance?
Yeah. Right.
No, of course not. But that's a crisis. So I think
we have started renting our parking lot. not we haven't tried to, but people have approached us for one thing or another.
Right.
We have a guy that's paying us $100 a month to park his trailer beside the building. And he moves it whenever we need him to, like he did for the swap meet. And then the other day we had a business that wanted a place to put a mobile van, part of some sort of training for surgeons. I don't know what they do. And so we let him use it and got some money from that. So I guess it's not a lot of money, but it's better than nothing.
Better than nothing. It's non-traditional revenue. I mean,
right.
If you can run it, do it. That's all I can say.
Right. Well, it's 5 after. Let's get started. Welcome to the October meeting of the Early Television Museum community. Tonight, we don't have a presenter tonight, so it's going to be just going to be an open discussion. I've got a couple of things to show you, which I'll do after I give my report. I think we hit 220 members this week. We're getting an increasing number of members from people coming in the door to the museum. Might be we put a sign up with a QR code on it, saying become a member. And we've gotten, I think, 6 or 8 members that way in the last few weeks. We're going to be starting in 1st of December, soliciting people for their next year's membership. So those of you that are members, you'll be getting an email. And those that aren't, you'll also be getting an email. The swap meet went very well, and the work day too. We had, I think, about 6 people here volunteering, doing things on Friday. And we got a lot of stuff done. We got a bunch of CRTs put up top. We got a couple of sets going, one pre-war set going. And we got a bunch of miscellaneous stuff done out in the warehouse. So it was worth it. We'll be doing that again because we'll always have another project. I'm building more CRT storage space. I realized that we could put shelves up back in that long hall we have. We could put a shelf about 8 feet above the floor and get about 120 CRTs on that shelf. And that'll allow us to get rid of our storage locker, which seems like every month we get a price increase. It's up to almost $300 a month for our storage locker, which is outrageous. So I think if we do this, we could spend maybe $400 on materials to put the shelves up and save ourselves $300 a month. So that's what I'm working on. Starting to plan for the convention. It is going to be the 2nd week in May. Unfortunately, as we've had this conflict, there's a conflict with something every time, one thing or another. And several years it's been Mother's Day on Sunday, and there's a conflict again. Mother's Day is on the 11th, but we have no choice. The Art Center is not available the first week in May. So it's going to be that weekend of May 10th and 11th. We'll be getting information out probably about the first of the year and be talking to those of you who are on the board about what we're going to do differently this year and for the convention. We had an earlier discussion at one of our other board meetings, but we really just threw ideas around. We start getting concrete about it then. Okay, that's about it for the museum news. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Hey, Steve, this is Paul Coopersmith. I have a question, please.
Yeah.
I was in email contact with the fellow who runs that World Radio History website, David Gleason, and I
Yes.
asked him if he would be interested in maybe giving a talk, about how he built his website and what he does in his history. He said he'd be interested. I think he lives actually in South America, but I'm not sure. I don't think he's
Okay.
local in the U.S., so it would have to be a remote presentation. So who would I put him in contact with to talk about this? Is there someone who runs the convention discussions on the board?
Dave Seco.
Okay. I don't have his email address, so maybe I'll forward the information to you.
It's fine with that. Fine with me.
That's great. Thank you, Steve.
I forgot to thank the New Jersey Antique Radio Club for sponsoring the meeting and providing our Zoom feed. Really appreciate it. Any other comments, questions?
Steve, just one quick thing. It looks like you conflict with the Kutztown radio meet this time.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's probably not good.
No.
That's not good.
Well, I haven't committed to anything. Maybe we do it the next weekend. I don't know if that's what that conflicts with.
That may conflict with Dayton, Dayton Hamfest, if anybody
Well,
cares.
That might not be bad. Because we always get requests of people going to the Hamfest to stop by here.
Uh-huh.
Well, we'll talk about it at the board meeting. I haven't committed to anything yet.
Yeah, I'll look for the how that proceeds, but I've got to beg off now. I've battling a bad tooth, and the tooth is winning tonight. So,
Oh boy.
yeah.
Sorry to hear that.
So just can't. I'm drinking ice water just to keep from going crazy here.
Oh,
So
wow.
anyway, I'll check the recording of it later on. Thanks a lot.
Great.
Bye.
See you later. Well, let me move on to. Well, first, let's see. Are there is there anybody out there who is a new participant that would like to introduce themselves? Well, I guess silence means no. Let me move on to show you the two things I want to show. You see if I can switch this thing to front view. Oh, there it is. Okay. That does it? Okay. This is the first thing I wanted to show. This is something where, let me turn off the light so I can get a little bit better. This is something that we talked about doing before. Rather than having our rare sets turned on all the time, I'm in the process of making videos of various sets. and putting them on. Now, right now, I've made 2 videos, and one of them doesn't show up too well on the video here, but one of them is 3 mechanical sets. That's the Western Empire State, and then followed by the Baird televisor, and the final one is the 60-line mechanical camera. That one I've got to work on. And it's difficult to take pictures of these screens because of the shutter speeds. And then this is the video for the pre-war sets. This is the Kosser British set. This is the RCA TT5. The Silvertone is coming up next. And then I have one for the Andrea that I haven't added yet. Now, you notice they're all different sizes. What I'm attempting to do is make the picture on the screen the actual size of the screen, so people get an idea of what they would be looking at, the size of the picture they'd be looking at. This will be running on a loop. Only the mechanical sets will be on this screen. We'll have I've got 2 more cheap monitors that are on their way. That there'll be one in the pre-war room and then another one in the color room where I'll have the field sequential sets operating as well as the CT100. So that's one of the things I wanted to show. I think this will really be of interest to people. And it'll save our sets. Now, the other thing, say hello to Nipper as we go by. The other thing is a little gadget that Matthew Desario saw on eBay and bought for the museum and brought it with him when he was out here for the swap meet. Let me extend this. Whoops. Back to full screen. This is a AC Nielsen. Well, they call it a recordiometer. It's from the 60s. It's the only one that we know still that exists. I've never seen one before. And it is essentially what it does is it has this little potted unit that is connected to it, which picks up the 15750 oscillator signal. It's got to have a transistor in it and a small relay or something, but this is how they tell that the TV set is on. This is dangled down behind the set, and in fact, it has goo on the back, so they stick them to the back of the set, and that's how they determine whether the set is on. And the way that this worked with Nielsen is that the customer had I'll show you some more in a bit. The customer had a diary, and that they were supposed to record what they were watching. And the purpose of this box was to remind people to fill out their diaries. And it had a buzzer in it and also a light that comes on. And you had a choice with this switch of having the buzzer or the light. And once an hour, there's a mechanical little motor in there with a with a micro switch on it that makes 1 revolution per hour. And when it has completed an hour, it'll sound the buzzer or light up the light to remind the person to write in their log what channel they're watching. And it also has a counter on the front that records the total number of hours that the TV set was on. Now, obviously, Nielsen had to physically come and pick up the diaries. And they also, when they came, I imagine they looked at this counter to see how many hours a set was on. That they could compare that to how many entries there were in the diary to get an idea of how accurate the what people were saying was. But it's a neat little gadget, only one I have ever seen. Pretty crude. Nothing electronic in it, just motors. With the exception of this little potted guy. Obviously, we're not going to open it up to see it. Now, Matthew did hook it up and dangle it behind a TV set and verified that it, when it picked up when a TV set was on, it would close a circuit and activate this box. Does anybody know? This is all we know about it. I don't know if anybody else has any information about Nielsen and what they were doing. So no comments?
Hello, Steve.
Yeah.
George here. I don't know how that box worked. That's a new one on me.
Okay.
And but there was an interesting box in the rack at NBC New York in the transmission area. You probably are aware how line 21 captioning worked, where they inserted 2 ASCII characters on line 21. The picture's supposed to start no later than line 22. So line 21 is the last line in the vertical blanking interval that's up for grabs. So the way closed captioning worked on analog TV was they would reinsert a data run-in clock and 2 ASCII characters as a video type waveform on line 21 field 1. Now, there were other things in the vertical interval people started using. There were test signals and things like that. But this box that the networks had, and I remember the one that NBC had in the New York transmission area, just a 1 rack unit box. It looked like it had a wire going off to a phone circuit, very mysterious. And it was an AC Nielsen box, and it was inserting data on one of the lines in the vertical interval. I don't know how they retrieved it off the home sets, but there were bits on that stream when you looked at the video waveform that signified whether you were watching NBC, ABC, or CBS. And that was something they were using, so you didn't have to fill out a book. But that's about all I know about it. The interesting thing about that device was there was supposedly some controversy because it was, in a sense, using the public airwaves for private communication, which you're not supposed to do. But since it was Nielsen and the TV networks and everybody was happy about it, it's just one of those things we didn't talk about. So that's a different Nielsen box, but something in the vein of trying to figure out how to record it.
Yeah, the box we have is got to be goes back to the crudest method they had for doing it, and they've gotten more sophisticated over the years. Of course, now with interactive TV, it's not an issue. You know, you can especially cable companies know everything you're watching all the time. So there's plenty of data available for Nielsen to rate stuff. Any other comments observations.
I know that Nielsen kept things pretty close to the vest. You know, they didn't let out much information about how they came to their ratings. I recall in the 70s when I was working for RCA, I got a cold call looking for engineers from Nielsen. And as much as they would reveal, it implied that they were creating something that would allow them to tell how many people were watching at a given time. And I had some ideas about how that might be done, but I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
I saw something in Consumer Reports a long time ago when I had this going on, and it showed a picture of a dog watching the television. So they doubted how valuable this thing was because people would just leave the TV on and take a hike.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny.
Well, I understand there are radio station, or there's a device now that if you have like a radio talk show with call-ins, you can buy equipment that will create the phone calls and argue with the host about some topic, politics, or whatever it is. And you can then carry on a conversation with this. And so you don't have to have actual callers who call in. And I suppose they could do the same thing with television very easily. And I think it goes under the heading of they'll pretend to produce entertainment or content, and we'll pretend to watch and consume it.
I wonder if they must use AI to do that.
Yeah, something along that line.
Yeah. I had my first experience with AI the other day. The Facebook has started putting these AI commentaries you may have noticed it in the discussion groups in various places. And one of them said something like, learn about the history of color TV. And so I clicked on it. And here's what it said. It said Motorola was the pioneer in color television. They introduced the CT100 in 1954 with a 21-inch screen. Later, Motorola introduced the works in a box or works in a drawer concept for television sets. And there were 3 or 4 other just obviously totally wrong statements. I was just astounded at how bad it was. And to me, how dangerous it is. You know, somebody reads that and, you know, thinks it's real. And their head is filled of, and I don't know who care, you know, not very many people care about who was the pioneer in color television, but on other topics, that could be really, really dangerous. Well, let's move on to open discussion now. Anybody have topics they want to talk about? Now's the time to bring them up.
I wanted to add to your last comment about AI and AI having hallucinations that turn out to look like facts. That's been going on since biological AI. I've seen plenty of accounts online of crazy things that people were supposedly inventing I've seen Baird British Baird being given the involvement in the moon landing television, for example, which happened 20 years after he died, and that he invented it, even though it was full of integrated circuits he'd never seen before. I've seen the same thing with Farnsworth, where they quote Farnsworth as talking about how his invention was on the surface of the moon. Well, it never was. And since he didn't invent the Vidicon or the image intensifier tube, which were on the moon, although he did invent multiplication, a version of a photomultiplier that was used in his early tubes. So, but not the silicon version that RCA was using, for example. So this has been going on for a long time, and a lot of times historians look back at technical magazines or consumer magazines, and they get all this hype that the manufacturers put in there to get investors involved in their companies. Baird was famous for that. RCA did a lot of that, and they take that as gospel history. Well, it's not. It's baloney.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No. Oh, hi. I'm Bill. I joined the club last spring. I went to the annual meeting and everything. I enjoyed it very much. I'm looking for a little bit of expertise here. I have 4 televisions that I restored, all late 50s. And I got can you see them here?
Yes.
Okay, I got a 17-inch Coronado, a 17-inch General Electric, a 17-inch Philco, and a 14-inch Olympic. They've all been restored to working, and I'm just looking for, I don't really know what their value is, and I thought maybe some of your members could give me a little of their expertise in this. Since I live in Minneapolis, it's just not something I can get to your site real often. So I guess that was all I had to say.
Okay, I'm going to have to say goodnight, folks, because you guys have a good time. We'll talk to you later. I got stuff going on here. Take care.
Okay. The subject of value of TV sets. Generally, 50s sets don't have much value at all. The collectors are interested in rare stuff, and when you get to the 50s, there are millions of sets manufactured, and so they're not very rare. Now, the fact that you have yours restored and working adds some value, and there may be a different market other than collectors for it. There may be somebody that wants one for a period, living room or bedroom that they're putting together in their home or something like that. And it may be that, an interior decorator or somebody like that would be interested in them. But as far as TV collectors, when you get into the 50s, with black and white sets in particular, the value is minimal.
Okay, well, I appreciate the feedback. I guess I always had a thing for 50 sets. It was the hand-me-downs I got when I was a kid, so I kind of like them. But
well,
I was
the reason for collecting them.
Huh?
That's the reason. That's a good reason for collecting them.
Okay. Well, again, I appreciate your input.
Sure.
Steve, I had a question. I wasn't able to make the swap meet in October. I was on vacation. How well attended was it?
You know, it's hard to tell. I think there were about 15 vendors, and, you know, people drifted in and out. I guess maybe 50.
Okay, great.
You know, AI's hallucinations were mentioned, and the way I like to think of it is the current AI systems are always hallucinating. They just happen a lot of times to have hallucinations that comport with the real world. But the thing that the researchers are seeing happen now is the input to the AI systems is starting to include AI systems output. And it's really bad feedback. They did some experiments where they did portraits of face and shoulders, and fed the output back to the input multiple times, and eventually the output that you get for the prompt to say a person with such and such characteristics ends up being exactly the same every time. And it's like a caricature of a real person instead of a realistic looking result. So, and the other thing about the hallucination, or as I like to think of it, dreaming of these systems, is they have no logic built into them for checking consistency of their output. So you will find them sometimes contradicting themselves from the starting sentences of their output to the body and the conclusion. And where it really shows up is when you ask a large language model to do math problems. They, if you're lucky, you only get 5% wrong answers, but very often it's much, much worse if you just change the wording of the problem. And it's really, really awful if you throw some irrelevant information into the input. The systems don't know how to ignore things that have nothing to do with the question.
You know, you're talking about like interactive with the TV program. They had something way back, and it was kind of looking into the future where you'd be able to give input to some program, maybe tell you how you want it to end or something like that. As far as talking back to the TV, everybody does. So, I think would be interesting is to have it so that you could, if you felt like it, get online so that the TV would just listen to whatever you're saying, no matter what, just background noise or anything. And they would randomly select a number of people and be able to go to maybe 100 different channels and just listen to what somebody's saying to a particular channel. Like if you turn on CNN and see what people are saying, if they're swearing at it or making comments or fighting over it or whatever, I'll bet that would be interesting television. That'll be all.
There has been interactive program direction at places like World's Fairs and Disney World. In the past, they've always cheated in that there may be, say, 10 branch points in the plot, but they're in groups. And so the first branch can go 4 ways, but it always comes back to the same node before you go to the second part of the plot. Instead of being it all the possible plot paths, it's really all the possible paths for the first scene, but it comes back to the same ending point of the first scene, and the second scene has its variations and so on. I don't know if anybody remembers any other things about Nielsen's technology. I have vague memories of reading about boxes that would listen to the TV audio in the room to determine what channel the set was tuned to. And also some vague memories about sub-audio tones being included in programs. And I wonder if that rings a bell with anybody.
How about subliminal messages? Did that ever catch on? I know they wanted to do that and do it in the movie theater and do it on television and so on. They'd sell you something you don't even know what was going on. What anybody thinks about that?
Well, it turned out after actually testing it and not just taking the hype of the promoters, it turned out that it wasn't effective. So they gave up on it.
Well, maybe the technology has improved so they could get it to work better.
Well, I know that they
the
did.
only sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that they outlawed the subliminal messaging stuff. I used to work for a company called Muzak, and they actually experimented with it a little bit in their piped-in music at one time. But like I say, the law, it was the law that got in there and said that you're not allowed to do subliminal. That was outlawed.
Yeah, I think you're right about the law. That would probably give people even more incentive to fool around with it.
That was outlawed in 1953 after the movie Picnic, that they were advertising popcorn and soda at the drive-in, and the government said that's enough. Can't put it in advertisements either.
Yeah, the only truly subliminal thing I can think of that has been used and is not for advertising or influencing the audience is to put hidden watermarks in movies so that people who would take a camcorder into the movie theater to get bootleg copies are foiled because the watermark is such that it shows up clearly in the camcorder video. Although the human eye can't detect it.
I know what you could do. I see like there's a television in your back and behind you. Okay. Now what you do, and I've seen it, there was in one movie there was a Halloween movie, and in the background a television was on, and the television was playing the movie Forbidden Planet, I think, in the background. So I think that would be a way that would work. Like you have something going on and you have a television in the background, as part of what you're trying to do. Okay, so it's obvious, you can see the thing and you just barely hear it, but you're not trying to hide it per se, but when something goes on in the background, people will try to listen to it. So what do you think of that?
I'd say there's lots of ways of persuading people without having flashing images that might be illegal. So you can't make it totally illegal to do that sort of thing. And there's always been product placements in movies where you see them drinking a particular can of beer, for example, and or the sex cell, with a pretty girl in the Corvette. Obviously, that it's that the Corvette is a chick magnet, so you're gonna buy the model, or that has an association with sex. So there's lots of that going on, has been for years and always will be, and it's not illegal, and it's just a form of persuasion.
The movies, the older movies, there was an era when you saw a vehicle, a car, they would have it so you couldn't see what make of car by the emblem on it. It'd be kind of blurred over or whatever. Now they don't do that. It's the kind of car that it's the kind of car, nobody cares. But they didn't want to advertise somebody's car. And I remember those things, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
I've seen many movies and television shows where all the cars were Fords, for example.
Yeah.
And I know that Perry Mason changed his car way back in the 50s a few times because different car companies were cutting deals with CBS. So this goes way back. The Andy Griffith was using Fords, if I remember properly. And I look for that sort of thing in movies, and there are various ways of persuading people, and they'll go on. They're subtle. They're very good at this thing. The same thing with print ads. But this isn't hypnotic or anything. It's just a play on people's desires and drives, and it's very clever.
If you keep repeating it, I remember a highway patrol had Buicks in the thing, for a police car or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, Perry Mason, I think, was Ford's at first, but then the show got a little bit older, and suddenly Perry was driving a Cadillac. So
he made a lot of money.
yeah, he's stepping up, you know. But if he'd stayed with the old team, he would have been driving a Lincoln. So it went on that way.
You didn't used to have to advertise Cadillacs.
Yeah, that's right.
You know that.
Steve McGarrett at Hawaii Five-0 drove a black Mercury, and it looked a lot like a Lincoln. And you're right. The most product placed item in movies is the ubiquitous dark green bottle of J&B Scotch, and the label is always facing the camera.
I remember when Get Smart, was on the 60s, and the opening sequence, he would zip up to the front of the building, always available parking space, in a Sunbeam Alpine, very nice little convertible sports car, until Volkswagen became an advertiser, and then he switched to a Karmann Ghia. It was real obvious that in that situation.
The product placement, I remember everybody talking about was Reese's Pieces in E.T. Instead of M&M's. There was a lot of discussion about why didn't M&M's outbid Reese's Pieces.
I read that they didn't want to be associated with that movie because it was kind of extraterrestrial. They bowed out. M&M's bowed out, and they're kicking themselves for doing that.
Definitely. Well, E.T. was small when the Reese's Pieces get stuck in his throat. Just doesn't seem to fit, I guess the best historic commercials were the cigarette commercials.
Yeah, they used to name the shows after the cigarettes. Jack Benny was the Lucky Strike show on the radio, and the band was playing the Lucky Strike song in the background whenever they would run a little short. And then a few years later on the radio, he switched to Jell-O, and they were doing the Jell-O ads.
You said Jell-O, folks.
Mm-hmm.
There was a thing where they had, I think, a radio program. And at the end of the program, maybe television in the 50s, and at the end of the program, they listed the veterans' homes they were sending free cigarettes to. Somebody said we went to war on cigarettes. Okay.
Yeah, I think we may have discussed this here before, but in the early days, the programs had a single sponsor. The sponsor produced the program, and due to a great deal due to Pat Weaver, Sigourney Weaver's uncle, who was head of NBC, touted the idea of selling commercial spot time instead of programs. And his point, which was very successful, was that the networks could produce programs and then not worry about who was producing M&A because they would just find sponsors and sell the ad time. And that turned out to be a big windfall for the networks.
Okay, what was Rod Serling smoking? The Twilight Zone, he's always lit up. I don't think anyone ever knew what he was smoking. That's what killed him. Anyone ever listen to the old radio programs?
Yeah, absolutely.
They have the commercials are right in there too. You know, whatever it was.
Yeah, our local show can't broadcast any tobacco ads anymore, even though they're in old time radio shows. So that's the only one that they cut out, which I think is interesting. But yeah, I remember the Rod Serling pictures, and I remember when he was promoting a writers club or something like that, and there was a picture of him sitting by his pool with a drink which looked like bourbon and a cigarette.
Well, his intro to the TV show, he was always in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
And he was always smoking during that.
Yeah.
You know, when he started out the show, he had a cigarette in his hand that was burning.
Yeah, I remember in the early 60s, the guy, Tallman, that played Hamilton Berger on Perry Mason, and Yul Brynner both did commercials, and the commercial went something like this: "I'm dead now, but when I was still alive, I liked smoking cigarettes a lot, and it did me in. And you should think about this."
It was Yul Brynner.
Yeah, Yul Brynner did that, and also the William Tallman.
Now.
Yeah, I'm dead now, or it was essentially that.
And he says, "Whatever you do, don't smoke." You know.
Yeah, yeah. And then probably the next commercial would be buy Kent cigarettes.
Winston tastes good like a cigarette should.
Yeah. Chesterfield, yeah, sure. L&M.
Did you ever watch the Mad Men series?
Oh, only a few of their promotions. I really didn't watch that. No.
Well, that took place like in the early 60s. And these guys are Madison Avenue advertising guys, and they're drinking and smoking all the time. Like in the office, you know, they had everybody in their own office had bottles of liquor right there, you know. And these people came over from England, you know, to be part of it. And the one guy said to the other boys, he said, "Boy, these guys drink a lot," you know. But that was trying to portray the era, and I think they did a little bit of an exaggeration to it, but not by much.
Well, I was in advertising. I won't say all the companies, but I remember I worked for one outfit where the older guys still had a little liquor in the bottom drawer of the desk in those days, you know. So there was a lot of that going on. I went to a trade show once where the guy that made one of the speeches to our group was a prominent announcer that had worked with the company for years, with the client for years, and he was sheets to the wind. And he had to put up with it. It wasn't the only meeting like that I went to. So yeah, it was pretty common.
Yeah, I worked for electric utility, and one day in the lobby, and I didn't go in through the lobby, but like about 10, 12 cases of liquor got delivered sitting there, you know. And what turned out was there was a nightclub kind of place that was a short distance away, and that nightclub was called the Electric Company for a while, you know. So when they did delivery, Well, you deliver it to the electric company. Well, there they are. You know, they had ready kilowatt up there and everything. And of course, they had to come and get it. But it was like, what's going on here? You know, yeah. One time they had some chairs delivered, and it had like I don't know. Today it would be like $5,000 for the chair, and that got around to the press or something. And what had happened was they're supposed to get some new chairs for the execs, and they didn't have what they're supposed to get, which was a lot cheaper, and everything. So they gave them on loan, so they left the tag on this thing. So they always something going on, you know, blaming the electric company for doing things that a lot of attention. So we had a lot of different things happen. But we used to, if somebody was drinking at work, it wasn't often. It was like the holiday time, you know, like people go out at lunchtime and be drinking and all that. But later on, there was a time, late 60s, where it was like absolutely no drinking on your lunch. And they really didn't care about the office, but they had to do that for anybody outside the office, the line crew or anything. They said even don't go to lunch in a beer joint, you know, eat your lunch somewhere else, you know, with that, because they just didn't want to be seen, you know, drinking on the job or perceived drinking on the job. And, you know, if you work with that kind of stuff, you really don't want to do it drunk. You know, it'll catch up to you.
Yeah, when I was in the games industry, we had a couple of plants that were a few miles apart, and there was a downturn in the industry, and they had to close one of the plants. And shortly thereafter, the bar across the street went broke.
Oh, yeah. Well, I knew a couple of brothers. One was a high school teacher, and the other one was just in the business, I guess, did something else. Well, they had a little small beer joint, and they said you only need one good customer to stay alive with that. And they had pennies, they called it. And what it was, people would come in there with stolen stuff and trade it for drinks. And there was a store that had all kinds of cheap stuff in it and a lot of things, variety right across the street. So they'd steal something there and bring it in. And one day I went into the joint because I knew the guys, and they had a typewriter and it was on the bar and they were playing with it. Well, I heard that day that somebody stole a typewriter from the sheriff's office. You know, you better hide it. You know? But yeah, these bars, they don't need a lot of just some good customers. It was a big markup on the liquor. I grew up next to a beer joint, all this stuff that was going on there. A lot of noise and things.
The early Kukla, Fran, and Ali kinescopes are being scanned and put up on YouTube, and some of the even earlier ones were scanned by the UCLA Film Archive, and they're already up there. But as far as commercials go, it's interesting because their sponsors change from time to time, and they generally work the sponsor into their skits, and then had a half-minute or minute commercial at the end of the show. But what was interesting to me is they apparently sometimes had trouble attracting a sponsor, and the announcement was just Kukla, Fran, and Ali were brought to you by NBC.
You know, a lot of these programs I didn't get to enjoy because in Binghamton, we only had one channel. And I think they would switch from one network to another. I'm not sure how it was, but I knew there were programs I heard about later on that growing up that we didn't get, because I don't think we ever got the Dumont network. Just the three.
Where was that?
Binghamton, New York.
Ah.
Yeah, just the one VHF channel. And later on, we got two more channels that were UHF. We got three because of we got the other two networks, and we got CBS was the one that was the main one. But then we got ABC, NBC, and PBS We had to use, I see where somebody on the shelf has a number of UHF converters. A lot of people here don't know what they are. So it was like cracking a safe trying to get your channel on. But they were good about them. HBO was in between like 5 and 6 or 4 and 5 for a while. That's how they wasn't scrambled. It was just in between that wide space. And if you took a converter and ran it backwards, you could get HBO. That was the first time when early HBO. That's what they had. It was off channel, and then later they just took away the sync pulse and moved it. There was a guy he had a license plate called HBO Kid, and he was building little converter boxes and selling them, making a lot of money until they stopped them. A lot of people did it on their own anyway, until they got more sophisticated.
Well, when it comes to satellite TV, they always pointed out that General Instrument had a black wire security fault in their boxes. If you knew the right point to short out, you could get free satellite service. And they never fixed that because they made more money selling boxes to people who would bootleg them than they did legitimately.
Well, when these kind of things where people had all the things that move the sync pulse, there used to be stories that they go around with a truck and they could detect it or something like that. It wasn't true. The one I saw, there was a couple of ones. I know this gal that she was a college student at Cornell, and she says, "Can you hook up my cable for me?" I says, "Doesn't the cable company do it?" She says, "No, you got to do it." So we went up in the attic, this huge attic, and there was this place where you could tap there, where all the cables were screwed on. And all they did was come and screw on your cable for your apartment. So if you knew about it, you just went up there and screwed on the cable and you had your cable TV in your apartment. And there was another guy I knew, he had a housing development and the cable was underground and all that. And he says, "No," he says, I got it free. I says, "How'd you do that?" He says, "Watch this." They had this big I don't know, like hard plastic, not just cheap plastic, but something that was pretty well made box under flush with the ground, and it had a lock on it. Well, the thing was, he just pulled it up, and the top of the box was just kind of slid on the bottom part and not connected to it. So all I had to do was pick up the top of the box and connect the cable, screw it together. And the other way they did it was, they just the cable was connected, but they put a block in between, just a solid thing. And all you had to do was eliminate that. So there was a lot of things like that that just depended upon people not knowing about it.
Yeah, the analog cable system that I was on back in Illinois in, I guess it must have been the 80s. Most of the channels were scrambled, but Disney used the trap. They put an interferer right in the middle of the band, and to allow reception, they would screw a trap into your line. So like you say, if you could get one of those traps, you could get Disney. But as a video engineer, the thing that I hated about that is putting a sharp trap in the middle of the video band is equivalent to producing a closing ghost, so that all the edges get double edges in the picture. And if you've got a crappy set that doesn't have any resolution, who cares? But I worked for Zenith, and I got sets with really quality video for home observation. And that just drove me crazy to look at what they did to their pictures.
You know, the television where the HBO was between 4 and 5. I had one TV because I worked on TVs when I was a teenager, and that channel tuner didn't have clicks. It was continuous. It was 2 through 13, but a continuous thing like that. So I didn't have that TV at the time, but I got to think you could just tune in HBO between was it between 4 and 5? 5 and 6, one of those. There's a lot of channel space in between there somewhere.
I think they were, I don't think they were using that space because it's only 4 megahertz. But the what used to be called the mid-band channels, which were right above the FM radio band, were blank on cable systems. And very often they put pay programming in there in the very early days.
Well, that mid-band, what channels was it between?
It was between the top of the FM band and channel 7.
Well, this thing here, people were getting this, okay, because all they would do is take the TV and they'd lose one of the channels. You had like just a dozen channels on the cable. They would adjust the coil in one of the channels, right, and they would get HBO. And I thought that was between 4 and 5.
No, I don't think that would work.
Is there space between 4 and 5?
It's not a big enough space.
I think it's between 6 and 7 you're thinking of.
Or 6 and 7?
Yeah, I think it's 6 and 7.
Well, it was 5 and 6. But anyway, they did it right along. It was a common thing to do to adjust the TV, lose one channel, and get your HBO instead. And it had to be somewhere in between 2 and 13. I thought it was between
probably they were lettered channels. Channel A, if I remember correctly, was
it was A through, they were lettered channels, yeah.
Yeah, now A was 120 to 126 megahertz. So it was above the FM band and below channel 7.
Okay, between 6 and 7 then.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's an FM radio station in Chicago that you can get on the top of the at the low end of the FM band. It's actually using an old TV station for its output, and that boggles my mind because the deviation is different on television FM than it is on the radio, but you can hear it. So something works.
Regency made a transistorized converter for your TV set that was essentially would shift the FM band down to a television channel for that same purpose. You could hear they must have had some little amplification someplace in it because you're right, the deviation was not the same, but they still show up on eBay every so often. I have one.
Which way was that converting an FM station so you could hear it on TV here, or the RC3? You shouldn't need amplification for that if it's just translating to a different frequency, because I think the deviation is higher on FM than on TV.
Okay, got the wrong way around.
I think.
My home is wired with twin lead. I got a lot of rooms that have twin lead output on the thing, and I used to use it when we had the analog TV, but because originally I had an antenna connected up, and then later the cable, was analog, so I connected that to the system. And they were saying, well, you shouldn't do that because it screws with aircraft or something. But I don't know what I could do with it now other than have a low voltage emergency lighting or something, with it, or use it for another telephone line. The whole place is wired with telephone lines, so I don't need that either. And the heck of it is, the house was built like 72. They should have at least put cable in, and they didn't.
I lived in a duplex in the Chicago suburbs that was built in '65, and they had put a VHF folded dipole antenna in the attic, which should have worked beautifully because this place was on a small hill that had a line of sight to downtown. But it was awful. And so I took the outlet plate off the wall and got a mirror and looked up in the wall to see what was going on. And when they built the place, they ran the twin lead along the electrical conduit and actually wrapped it around a couple of times. So I got some 75 to 300 transformers and put coax in, and then the reception was beautiful.
Deviation on the FM band is plus or minus 75 kilohertz, and on the analog TV was only plus or minus 50. Still sounded pretty good, which I think went to stereo right around 1985 or so. But the handful of stations that used FM broadcasts on the now defunct Channel 6 analog bandwidth, they refer to them as Franken FM stations. There were only, I think, 10 of them nationally at the peak, but I think only 2 of them are functional now, one of which is in Chicago. I wish the FCC would put an end to that, because if we got rid of the old Channel 5 and Channel 6, that spectrum could be reallocated to widen the FM band. It's a natural fit, and then maybe we could have digital FM at that lower end, or migrate AM stations that are struggling because of noise QRM, based on these switching power supplies, which are everywhere now, feeding people's phones and LED light bulbs and the twisty fluorescent light bulbs. So it kind of makes sense to get those 2 Franken FMs and put them out of their misery. But that's just my.
Well, people, I have to go. I have an early appointment in the morning. Keep on talking, and I hope we see you next month.
Yeah,
Channel 6 audio was at 87.75, and that's actually an allocation in countries outside the US. So a lot of car radios had 87.75 on the ability of their synthesizer to tune that frequency. So these stations would put up a video carrier with something and irrelevant. And classically on TV stations, the picture and sound were different. In the early days, it was really 2 separate transmitters, one on FM for sound and one on AM for the video, and each with their own crystal oscillator and all that sort of thing. But the FM stations normally started, I think, at 88.1 in the US. So Channel 6 audio was 87.75. At one time, I was chief engineer of a Channel 6 station, so I would listen to the station on my car radio, and so I could tell if something went wrong at the station by listening to the audio as I drove around. But that I didn't know how many stations there were. There's a few, as you pointed out, and I don't know. If the FCC will tolerate it and let them transmit on 87.75, I guess so be it. As far as getting more FM stations below 87.75, well, the trick is getting the car radios. The hundreds of millions of radios that are out there converted so they would receive it. Other than, well, you could do that. The other interesting thing that's going on right now, as most of you know, is the digital FMs use so-called white spaces like they did for the TV. They get the extra bandwidth by just extending the digital signal into the channel space beyond what the normal allocation was, and that's where they put the digital carriers. So they're really using, isn't it 200 kilohertz bandwidth for each channel? There's others here would know exactly, but at any rate, the FM stations that are digital, if they are fortunate enough to have no one butted up against them on the adjacent channels, I don't know how they do it in every area, populated areas, but they actually exceed what the normal bandwidth of the FM allocation was in order to put up those digital carriers each side of the normal stereo signal. And as somebody pointed out, yeah, the TV was 25 kilohertz deviation back in the day when it was mono audio, and then the FM mono stations were 75. But then when they went to stereo in the early 60s, the FM deviation was narrowed down considerably. It had to fit below the 19 kilohertz pilot and 38 kilohertz double sideband signal. So I don't know what the deviation was exactly, but it was a lot narrower than 75 kilohertz deviation once they started transmitting stereo.
Well, they want to do away with the AM in the car radios.
Well, I think AM it's got its challenges, as you pointed out, with all the noise. There was an SBE meeting in Washington a few weeks ago at the 50,000 watt WTOP transmitter site, and I don't know how many listeners they think they have listening to that 1500 kilohertz station, but you need 50 kilowatts to get it around town. It's just like you pointed out, there's a lot of noise. One of the other stations in the DC area that was on 630 kilohertz just gave up and switched over everything to FM because they were a 5 kilowatt station. They raised to 10 kilowatts. It really wouldn't still get over the line noise as you drove around town, and so they pretty much have abandoned it. So AM's, there's still a lot of people on it, but I don't know how long people can afford to keep those things on the air.
Well, the value of the AM could be if the whole grid goes down and stays down, then it would work pretty well, and that's all you'd have for communication. The O'Connor, remember that? Atomic Attack, 640, and something else, 2 frequencies that you would go on for emergency.
640 and 1240.
Yeah, emergency broadcasts like that. But yeah, I know I have like an AM radio in the car, and I got a transformer right outside my house here. My house radio, I have a hard time getting anything with it. That depends on which frequency, but
well, there's people working on building transformers that are actually switch mode power supplies, so that pole pig out there, instead of being just a transformer, will someday have transistor switching supply in it with lightweight magnetics to convert the 7 kV down to 120, 240. So you can look forward to that.
So you don't need a conventional transformer.
In the AM radio world, the slide rule tuning came in 1938, and the 2 frequencies that you mentioned that were intended for what they called civil defense, some radios do have them marked with like a triangle, a delta triangle, and the letters CD in them to tell people, hey, those were the 2 spots to tune for civil defense, broadcast in the event nuclear fallout, whatever.
It was kind of a pain. A broadcast station that was AM had to actually be able to convert their station over to 640 or 1240. So there would usually be instructions taped on the side of this thing somewhere that said, okay, go in here and clip lead this condenser across this coil and retune this to this position. The stations, depending on where they were in the dial, they would move to 640 or 1240 during the Conelrad test, and they would move depending on what frequency they were already on, they would move to the closest frequency that they could get their transmitter to work on, 640 or 1240. And that meant you had to retune the antenna and all this stuff to convert it over and make it transmit. The idea they had was that if all of the stations in the United States were suddenly on 640 or 1240, the evil incoming bombers would not be able to direction find on the stations because everybody would be on those frequencies rather than on different frequencies that would identify what city they were in. And so that was the purpose of the 640 and 1240 and the little markers on the radio dial.
Well, they had 4 stations in Binghamton. One of them, I think, was 680. The others were like 12 something or whatever, 12, 13. I wondered if all 4 of them would have to do that. Whether only one would have to.
I think not, because what they did is they did not run all the Conelrad stations simultaneously. They actually switched stations on and off. So if the enemy bombers were trying to home in on a signal, every few seconds they get the signal from a different direction. So Binghamton probably, unless there's no other station that you could receive in Binghamton, they probably only had one that went on and off the air every few seconds.
Because I don't think
I
they
remember listening during a test in Chicago, and
too far apart.
And the the reception went from loud and clear to weak and noisy, and in between every few seconds. And I don't know which stations they were using, but they definitely were not all Chicago stations.
Yeah, I don't remember actually experiencing it myself, but we get a thing now on the television, and until recently, this thing was like a test that would go on about 2 a.m, and it would be so loud. I mean, it just drive you crazy on the thing. You'd have to mute it. It was so bad. And now they backed it down, with it. And it was just right around here, because I know when I was in Florida, you just saw the thing and you didn't hear anything, and they want to get your attention, but the thing was absurd, and I never got a chance to complain about it before they backed it down. Screeching thing. And it says like it's a well, they'll use it for weather. They'll have some sort of weather alert. And we get weather alerts here, but we haven't had anything of any significance. I remember, I mean, you get a thunderstorm or something like that, and wind could send stuff around. There could be damage and all that, but it's not a hurricane or anything of that nature.
The British had an interesting situation like this during World War II, which of course started earlier in Europe than it did here. They turned off their television transmitter at Ali Pali, which was a high point in London. They didn't have a lot of different stations at that point. So Alexandra Palace. And then the Germans had a direction finder, and that was the reason they did that. They were going to tune in to the television transmitters from Ali Pali. So whatever they were using at that point, the British were very smart, and what they started to do is they put the Alexandra Palace transmitter back on the air, and they transmitted fake signals to the direction finders that the Germans had on their bombers, and the missiles that they were using homed in on the wrong signals, and then they would land in a field or something instead of on the city. And they eventually, this was called Waigarat, was the name of the signal. And eventually it proved that they figured out that they were not effective with their bombing, and they had to totally discontinue the technology. Very clever.
Yeah, the main reason that Tesla and some of the EV manufacturers intended to drop AM reception on the in-car radios is just because it's too much electromagnetic, too much noise. A lot of the cars use induction motors with a variable frequency drive because an induction motor's RPM is really controlled by the frequency of the line signal feeding it, not the voltage, as a commutated DC motor would be. And so the very variable frequency drive is very electrically noisy, and that's the real reason they didn't want to spend the money. And it may be even technically impossible to make the AM radio work while the car is operational, but while it's sedentary, the AM radio could have function for emergency purposes. But the FCC kind of leaned on the manufacturers auto manufacturers, that is, to include AM going forward. But now the plug-in, pure EV vehicles kind of sort of passe in America, and everybody wants the hybrid, which makes more sense. And the other thing I can think of is somewhat recently, toward the tail end of last winter, I was doing some research on Wikipedia pages, and there are several pages that are pretty helpful about the transition to digital radio in the United States. In Europe and in Asia, they have DRM and DRM plus, and there are different modulation schemes and systems. But here in the U.S., there's a company called Ubiquiti, which now has been purchased, and I can't remember, it's called something else even now, but it's privately held, and so you can't buy stock in it, because I attempted to do so about 10 years ago. But this private, Ubiquiti modulation licensing, setup, it kind of locks out innovation, and it's not an open source network kind of, open source code concept like they use in Europe. So trying to broadcast in the digital modes, whether it's AM or FM, the AMs fare worse performance-wise, because as you go beneath bridges and viaducts, the AM signal cuts out, and the FM signal is supposed to be the backup, but there's a delay of X many milliseconds to several seconds, so it's so disruptive it's useless. So a lot of the AMs stopped broadcasting in the digital mode at night. And they've gone up to power here in the Detroit area. We had a 5 kilowatt AM on an Omni antenna, WWJ, at 950 kilohertz. Excellent 24-hour news station. They went up to 50 kilowatts, and I just couldn't figure out why, because I live 15 miles from Ann Arbor. As I approach Ann Arbor at night, the signal is gone. It's because they went to 50 kW and had to go to a directional antenna array, and so they're 50 kW around the clock with two different directional patterns night and day, but it's kind of useless. The real reason they went up to 50 kW was for noise and because they wanted to broadcast digitally. But in my opinion, the digital on the AM band is terrible. They're supposed to be in band on channel, is the IBOC is the concept, but they do tend to bleed, even the AMs, which are more tightly filtered into adjacent channel space. Only a little bit in AM, but a lot of the AMs now don't do it at night. They're playing fair with each other, because it's in their collective interest to be able to function at night. But the FMs, interestingly, they're like 4 Wikipedia pages on digital radio, and the FM one, interesting, because in the analog world, it's 200 kilohertz channel spacing, and the normal spacing was 400 kilohertz. So they would leave, like in the TV days, a blank channel to either side. But because of band crowding, the FCC goes to half spacing, and just about every frequency is used in major metropolitan markets. Problem with that is when you're using the digital Ubiquiti equipment on an FM, it does not fit within the template of 200 kilohertz channel spacing. It is 400 kilohertz wide. So the FM signal sounds good, analog, and the hash is polluting one channel up and one channel down, and there are 201 channels in the current FM band. In the AM world, it's mostly within each 10 kilohertz channel, but as a consequence, if they want to use the digital, they filter the actual analog signal down, so it's not 10 kilohertz wide anymore. They went to 7.5 kilohertz, and some stations elect to broadcast at 5 kilohertz. That's why you hear such poor audio quality on those stations that elect to broadcast digital. So it's just my opinion, but I really do think very few people use VHF low for digital TV currently. There are only 60 channels or 60 stations in the entire 50 states of the United States. And it's mostly low power TV, religious and small stations that are held by investment equity firms hoping to, cash out and sell them like they did in the reverse auction. But since there are only 60 stations, 3% of the market is on VHF low, and most people don't have a VHF low capable antenna anymore. Those that do, it's a legacy antenna that they've had up on the roof or in their attic for a long time. But I think it makes sense to say goodbye to channels 6 and 7, because there's channel 2, 3, 4, and a little bit of a gap, then 5 and 6, and of course there's a big gap before you go up to VHF high. But channel 6, you're right. A lot of people that had a channel 6 analog TV station could hear in the TV in the car's FM radio the audio in that channel 6 TV station, even though it's slightly off frequency and it's at higher distortion, and they like that. But I believe are only 2 Franken FMs currently operating. And it's just my opinion that that's not in the public interest. The airway's a limited resource. It should be shared for the greatest good for everybody. And they have a couple of stations owned by whomever just want to make a buck, are tying up development progress for the country. Because if you look at, I think Switzerland or Finland, one of those 2 countries in Europe, they've even shut down FM, analog FM. But we really do need to get into digital FM. And it makes sense to add it right next to 88.1 megahertz and below, which is right where channel 6 is. So if channel 6 and 5 were converted from the low VHF TV band, or at least boot the stations that are on those 2 channels and load up channels 2, 3, and 4 more, I think it would be in the great interest of American people to develop that and go forward.
So if I understand it right, you got an old digital TV. In some areas, you could still pick up some, not digital, analog channels, correct?
Oh yeah, that's true.
Oh, geez.
But
Yeah,
that's why
the-
those
yeah.
stations have to transmit both video and audio, so that the TVs that are designed to pick up a conventionally old analog TV standard will, because if they didn't transmit the video carrier, I think most of them would not receive the audio.
You're right. They did just send out usually a fixed screen boilerplate.
Well, how many people are actually receiving these signals?
Well, quite a few, if at least at one time, quite a few people in my area were receiving it on their car radios, because car radios, most of them will tune to 87.75. That's a frequency, or they'll receive, I guess, 87. I don't, whatever the next try on yours, but most of the stations in the US start at 88.1, but in other countries, it starts at 87.7 or something like that.
But beyond the car radios, you're talking television? I mean, people are getting television?
Well, they could pick it up on their TV, but I doubt that most people are doing that. I imagine most people are tuning it in on a radio. because
okay,
all they
so
need to
what you-
pick up is the 8775 transmission.
All right, so what you're talking is some of the radio you'd lose, that's all. But I mean, we're past the television. Nobody's worried about that on nobody's broadcasting on television, are they?
Well, they are on channels 5 and 6 on the VH low, channels 2, 3, 4. There's a space where there's land mobile radio service. Then there's channel 5 and 6 that completes VHF low. And I believe that 5 and 6 should be converted to an extension of the FM band because they butt up against it. But there are 60 stations altogether in the entire United States that are on those 4 or 5 VHF low channels. But
those are digital TV stations, though.
yes,
I think
they're digital.
Yeah, I think the question was: are there any analog stations that people are watching on their old analog sets? And I believe the answer is no, except in some very strange, rare cases. As far as broadcasting digital TV and low VHF, the best you can say is mistakes were made. First of all, the power was limited to prevent co-channel interference during the simulcast period where both analog and digital were broadcast, and they still ran into problems in some places. And one of the biggest cases was in Maryland, where a PBS station went to digital, and their signal propagated across the bay and interfered with an analog station, even though the power was restricted to what the calculations said should not interfere. And the second mistake was that a survey of noise conditions in the VHF band was not made. They depended on data from the early 1950s. And it turns out, even in the early 90s, the lower VHF band was a lot noisier than it had been before. So the third stage of the mistake was that the FCC and the broadcasters didn't think to say, when analog goes away, we can raise power. We should plan to do that. And therefore, a lot of transmitters got built that could only do the limited power that was specified during the transition. And now they're all over the place. So no single station on the low VHF can increase their power unilaterally, because they'll get co-channel interference with somebody else. It's not economically feasible anymore for all the stations to go to increased power, because they've auctioned off all the spectrum, and that auction money is not available for another change to the equipment. So we're stuck with with poor digital TV performance on the low VHF, which is really didn't have to be if people were smarter in the beginning.
I think also, and I think you'd agree, Wayne, what part of this confusion about the channel 6 is that the channel 6 transmitters that people are using for these so-called Franken FMs are not really channel 6 TV stations, they're translators, because when they wrote the rules to convert from digital TV, analog TV to digital, they said the broadcast stations had to transmit digital and stop transmitting analog, but they didn't say the translators had to transmit digital. So it allowed, and I don't know what the rules are today, but at the beginning of this, translators were allowed to transmit analog. And that's what these stations are that are the so-called FM Franken stations, are an analog translator, I guess, licensed by the FCC, but they're on channel 6 analog frequencies and transmitting picture and sound, AM and FM, analog television signal on the old channel 6 analog allocation. And I don't know whether these were grandfathered in, whether they've been eliminated by later rulemaking, or what the heck's going on. I have to talk to somebody in the business to know, but that's what those stations were that were transmitting FM on 87.75 was a translator.
I can't get any over-the-air television, any broadcast television where I am.
Oh, you're not supposed to. Everybody's gone digital. So
I was so happy to get cable originally where I am. I didn't have cable of any kind. And the nearest cable was a little over a mile away. And they said, well, you have to have like 10 other people to sign on to it, and it'll cost you each $1,000. And that was like 40 years ago. I didn't even ask anybody else. I would have done it. But what happened was new cable came in from the other direction, went right by my house. So I've had it ever since. And I talk about like, I know what we were talking about anyway, my cable and my computer and telephone to get all together are like a couple $100, for that. So I don't know how I ever got by with an over-the-air TV with 4 channels, I waste an awful lot of time watching TV. I don't know why the hell it is. I look to go to bed about 11, 12 o'clock, say by midnight, and always something interesting comes on at that time and keeps me up till I fall asleep. I didn't go to bed till 4:30 this morning because I slept at least 2 or 3 hours in the chair in front of the TV. So. Always regret it, but there you go. I don't know what will happen tonight.
I live in Plymouth, Michigan, and I have relatives with both satellite TV and cable TV. So to see a certain game, like I'm visiting somebody right now to watch the Michigan game because it's restricted to the Big Ten network, Michigan State and University of Michigan. But I, at my location, just depend entirely on over the air with 2 antennas aimed at 2 markets, Detroit and Toledo, Ohio. But I'll tell you, I can get with there are 8 towers, but some of the towers have multiple antennas and stations on them. And then for each virtual frequency, there are sub channels, for example, channel 2.1, channel 2.2. I just call them sub channels, but in Canada, Canadian people, which the border is very close to where I live, it's only 25 miles away, they refer to the sub channels as diginets, although no Canadian digital TV broadcasts on the sub channels, which seems to be underutilizing the resource, but they call them the diginets instead of the sub channels. Well, all told, I get 73 channels on all the sub channels. Here in my market, I get 73 channels. That's just Detroit, not including, I can get ABC, NBC, and some, multiple, other stations out of the Toledo market. But so I get 73 channels, and then of those, some of them are jewelry TV, home shopping network. We have the internet now. We have Amazon now. But I mean, 25 years ago, Shop at Home Network might have served a greater purpose, especially in rural markets where people don't have regular stores. They could order something they see on the TV and have it shipped to their door. I don't think that the need is as great today with, the digital world, the internet. But so the point is, of the 73 or so channels I get, I'm going to say probably about 45 of them are good. The rest I have hidden in the do not display list. So it's in memory because it's been scanned. So if I punch the number up on the remote, I can go straight to any channel. But if I use the slewing buttons, channel up, channel down, they do not display. I don't really care about jewelry TV. But so I've got about 45, 48, something like that, channels to watch and choose from, free, over the air. I mean, there's a network called Antenna TV, Comet, Laugh. I mean, ones like Story. It's called Story. It's kind of like PBS or the History Channel. There's quite a bit to choose from out of 45 channels, free, perfect picture, digital, over the air. It's come a long way, even after repack.
No, it's fairly flat and level where you are.
Metro Detroit area is relatively flat. Yes.
You see, I'm near Ithaca, and the nearest places are Binghamton or Syracuse, and there's all kinds of hills between here and there. I mean, the line of sight, it just isn't going to work. In fact, Ithaca had amongst the very first cable system that somebody put some antennas on some high hills, and they were stringing cables through the trees and stuff to service the people in the city with that. They had a few channels on it was a little privately owned place, cobbed together there, because you couldn't get anything. Well, like I could get on the VHF, just the old analog stuff. I had a high antenna. I could get some Syracuse and some Binghamton on it pretty well. But I don't know, like, we'll see, Ithaca's even downhill. I mean, they got hills all around them. So you get down in the city, can't get anything. So they got to go cable, I guess, or satellite. I guess mostly they go cable because they're always bitching about the cost of cable. In fact, there's a couple groups now starting up another. They have Spectrum Cable and some local cable companies, run by the city or something, just because they don't like the price. I don't know how that works when Spectrum has a franchise, but somehow they're doing that. They're attempting to.
If your antenna is still serviceable, you might consider spending about $45 in getting a Zenith digital tuner, ATSC 1.0. They call it 1.0 now because we didn't know back then it was being developed and rolled out that there would be an evolution, and we're going to skip 2.0 and jump to 3.0. There are DRM issues at play now where they want to charge and scramble the channels, and that's not really considered playing fair with public airwaves and on public resource. So the rollout of ATSC 3.0 has been greatly hampered. There was a recent lawsuit where LG, a major TV manufacturer, was slapped with, I think, a $16 million fine and has to pay $16 or something like that for every set that they had manufactured by one of the companies that had a chip in there. I can't remember the name of the company, but so if you bought one of these, current standard ATSC 1.0 Zenith digital tuners, about $45 only, you would be surprised what you might be able to get on that. And the only reason I mention this is good for
height, right? Well, it's just line of sight to get this stuff.
Well, with the VHF, you might be surprised what you could get. Is my point. And in my father's house, where I am right now, he has satellite TV, which is great. But guess what? When the storms and the clouds get really heavy, the satellite TV, it disappears. It could be 10 minutes, it could be an hour. It's nice to have the over-the-air backup.
Well, I have the cable, okay? And I got, infinite number of channels on that. I got a good internet. But, the whole bit, but I don't know anybody that has. I've never talked to anybody that says they have anything but cable here or satellite. So
That's 80% of the market, but 1 out of 5 people in America do not have cable. They may have high-speed internet based on it, but they may not be watching TV through cable. 1 out of 5 people.
That's true. Like if you were in Binghamton or you're in Syracuse, you definitely could get I'm sure it works there. Because they broadcast they have broadcast stations from both places. And maybe even other place, Elmira, but where you got hills in between, blocking you. You can't, I don't see, I don't, I kind of asked around and they were talking about, well, you could get an antenna, one thing and another, but like I say, I don't know anybody that gets it that way because I don't think it's possible here. Now there's areas like that are just nearby that don't have cable and they have satellite because that's the only thing they could do. And they're always complaining to extend the cable. And it's a rural area where I am actually. Yeah, because there's farm field on one side of my property here.
Places in Tennessee and Kentucky make more use. It's more common to have satellite TV just because of the natural terrain and that location. You're right. And cable TV's original vision, its reason it was developed and invented was because of mountains in California when you had, hills and natural barriers limiting line of sight propagation. So yeah, depending on whatever your location is, there's usually 1 or 2 solutions that are going to be favored.
Ithaca had it, way back when, and they were fooling around with it, making their own there to get, because like it's well, see, Ithaca's got hills, like they say, far above Cayuga's water. Well, that's up on the hill, the colleges, but the city itself is down with it. You want to, you're anywheres around the greater Ithaca area. You want to get downtown Ithaca, all you do is go down from any direction. If you take a bowling ball, it'll find its way there. Now, finding your way back out might be difficult, but yeah, so they're kind of in a hole. Just like, see, the lake, Cayuga Lake is there. It's low. That's why the water goes down and fills the lake, so.
Have you heard of AntennaWeb.org?
Yeah, it's one of 10 different websites that allow you to get data to plan for how you would aim your antenna during the setup process.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can put it in your location and you may get an over-optimistic estimate of what you can receive, but you will at least get an idea.
Yeah, in my experience, you can get all the way down to about 50 dBm. Weaker signals and can go all the way to negative 90 dBm on those charts. But unless you have an antenna on the roof, not in the attic, and you have, really big antenna that's up high as well, most digital tuners are going to see the noise floor at 15.2, 15.7 dB on the TV's information setup signal strength page when you have that open. They're going to be really limited to getting what I think are color coded. There are 5 colors for concentric rings for how far out an antenna can get, no matter whether it's an Omni or a beam or not. And this is something that was developed by the antenna industry, but basically only the 3 strongest of the 5 radial rings can most people get with a Yagi beam, say, in the attic. And the attic could typically cut down about 40% of the range what the given antenna is capable of. But having an antenna on the roof and grounding ramifications and complications and weather, UV light, degrading the little black plastic elements that keep the dipoles open and so forth. Attic installs are preferred when for longevity reasons. So you can probably get, in my experience, on those polar plots on these websites. tvfool.com is another website. Rabbitears.com is another one. But again, about 50 dBm is about the limit. The three closest rings, which is about 40 to 45 miles.
I think if I was going to do anything, I've got some high trees. They're not that close to the house because I don't want them there. Just go one of the high trees and stick it on that and run a cable over to the house. Because I wouldn't want to. The thing is, I had an antenna here and it was pretty high and it was like a heavy pipe that went way up, but also it could get hit with lightning. Now I have lightning rods on the house, so I was glad to get rid of the antenna and that pipe that went up there. But
Wayne hit something very key, I think, during the testing and the rollout and determining power levels by the FCC. First off, VHF, through the 90s, and before the 90s, it was the coveted place to be. The moneymaker stations were all on VHF. Not only that, but they were on VHF low, which propagates the furthest. It'll do 2 knife edge levels over the horizon. And that's why I think the late, about 1988, which is I think when The Simpsons came on, which was the most watched show in the history of TV, even though it's a cartoon, that was a Fox program. And where everybody may recall when Fox first got in business as a TV network, they were kind of the butt of all kinds of jokes. Saturday Night Live made all kinds of jokes about Fox way back when, and now they became a force to be reckoned with. Their strategy as a company was to buy VHF low stations. All their flagship stations were on VHF low for that reason. Best bang for the buck. And that was in the analog days, but analog had a great advantage over UHF, and they called it. There's a thing called the digital. The UHF discount, where in say Nielsen ratings and other forms where you determine what you're going to charge for advertising and so forth, the UHFs were at such a disadvantage. First off, the band was allocated in 1948, but no station got online until 1952. In the first year of operation, 97% of all those stations went bankrupt because most TVs didn't even have a UHF tuner. And incidentally, the barbershop barber pole Predicta that the club has for the lottery ticket prize is kind of a rare beast in that it has in the photo that's been sent out in the email communications. You can clearly see the UHF tuner on the right hand side of that. So a lot of people didn't even have a UHF tuner, and that made UHF very difficult to compete in the early days. But so UHF ultimately got more power to try to compete. It doesn't propagate as far. Well, the analog days, the top dog the analog VHF loads were limited to 100 kilowatts. Most of them weren't at that, but that was the max. The VHF highs were limited to 318 kW, but the UHFs all had one power level, which was 5 megawatts of ERP, a whopping amount of power. After the transition to digital, all the stations are at different power levels. So as you go higher in the UHF channel, you get more and more power for any station by the FCC, attempting to maintain parity of the signal reach for all stations, so that what the FCC envisioned was trying to erase that favoritism for VHF low that existed in the analog days, where everybody would have, ideally, in theory, the same range, no matter what channel they were on UHF or VHF. The consequence of that is the VHF power levels have been reduced so much compared to the analog days that they actually are at a disadvantage now. And the main reason for that is, even though VHF is more efficient for propagation, it's less efficient for penetrating the walls of a house or a structure. So people using rabbit ears or an in-the-attic TV get worse performance on it. And most VHF low stations, even though there are only 60 of them currently on the air, only have a maximum of, I think it's 30 kilowatts, but a lot of them are even less than that. So it performs very poorly because of two things: the noise environment and the power levels are somewhat unfair. But if you look at the plots in any given station, they all appear to perform equally according to, in the eyes of the FCC. But a lot of people don't have a VHF low antenna, and the VHF just doesn't have enough power to be on competitive with the UHF channels. That's why just about everybody's there. VHF low, even though it was once the coveted place to be with the Fox corporate strategy, it's considered the basement now, and it's only low-powered religious stations and a couple of other PBS stations that took the payout during the reverse auction, and vacated UHF for the benefit of some other station that wanted that UHF allocation, and they're on VHF low now, which pretty much no one can get. Even though that was the farthest transmitting group of channels, now it's the place not to be. So it's VHF high and UHF. And then after the repack and the frequencies were well established, a lot of the antenna manufacturers now make dual band antennas where they used to be tri-band, and they do have VHF high as well as UHF, and they perform better than the old tri-band antennas because they didn't have to make as many compromises on where they cut the antenna, the dipole lengths for tuning in the center of the band. So the interesting thing is VHF low, it just seems very underutilized because the power levels are low. And then the final thing was antenna height. There were assumptions, the engineering assumptions the FCC used were that everybody would have an outdoor antenna at 30 feet of height. And I would ask you, how many people do you know have an outdoor antenna at 30 feet of height? If you have an outdoor antenna, most of them are about 22 feet or less, 10 feet per story of a house. So it's unreasonable engineering assumptions that were agreed to. And I think that's really what a key point that Wayne pointed out.
Yeah, they did a lot of sharp pencil work to be able to say that they duplicated all the allocations, especially during the transition when they were simulcasting. And I could say it was very short-sighted not to consider changing the power allocations once analog went away.
I'd say I had a good 30 feet in height when I had an antenna. I could get Syracuse and Binghamton quite well with it on UHF and VHF. The Binghamton channel was 12. The Syracuse ones were 3, 5, and 9. And the UHF out of Binghamton was 46 and 40. And then Fox came out. I don't remember what that was back then.
Interesting thing about the channels is 12 is actually a good channel. Most antennas tuned for VHF high capability receive a pretty good gain on that channel. But channel 13, the top dog channel for VHF high, is a terrible channel. A lot of the antennas just do not perform well the way they're cut in the band. And then there are two aspects of an antenna. It's raw gain and it's net gain. If you look at gain plots for the bandwidth of any given antenna, the manufacturers usually don't stipulate whether it's in dBi or dBd. The omnidirectional isotropic dBi figure is what they tend to publish, which is 2.5 dBi 2.5 dBi lower than the equivalent dipole in dBd. So channel 13, most of the antennas do not perform well, and that's just the raw gain. But then when you look at net gain after coming through the transformer, there's a 300 ohm to 75 ohm transformer to feed the down lead, in your wall to your TV set or your distribution splitter in the basement, so to speak. The net gain on channel 13 is just terrible. Same thing even with UHF. The channels 14 through 20 are considered disfavorable channels only because in I think 20 markets in the US, they use them for land mobile, taxi, and other purposes. But in today's day and age, that usage is very greatly diminished. And I think in 1 or 2 more years, all of those users will have been migrated off those channels, and that would improve the noise, the background noise level on those channels. But if you look at the polar plots, not the polar plots, but the gain plots across all the channels for any given UHF antenna, usually channels 14 through 17 perform poorly, really poorly. 14 is the worst, and the gain starts curving up slowly. In my opinion, in my experience, channel 18 is the lowest UHF channel that performs well. The other problem is a lot of antennas were cut pre-repick, cut for the UHF band going all the way up to 83 channels. And in 1983, for analog cell phone amps, the first generation, we lost the top 14 channels. So, and then there was a cut back to most tuners in the 90s will only tune up to, I think, channel 60, 69, I think it was. Then we lost more frequencies. Then the 52 was supposed to 51 was supposed to be the top dog channel. Then cell phone companies complained they wanted a guard band, so we lost 51. So then 50 was the top used channel, and then after repack, we lost even more. So that now channel 36 is the top channel, and incidentally, channel 37, even though it's in the middle of the UHF TV band, was never used for TV. There's never a station ever got on the air. They protect Arecibo. It's a looking out into space, cosmic radiation background telescope. And there was one, I think, somewhere in the Chicago area also. But so these antennas, even though they were cut to tune all the way up to channel 83, now north of 614 megahertz, we have cell phone, 5G cell phone is migrated all the way down there. So these antennas are picking up noise from nearby cell phone towers that now needs to be filtered out. So it's important to have a LTE filter cutting that out, because your antenna is feeding in so much noise from the top frequency range that they were designed for. It impedes the performance where on the channels that you do really get. So the point is, it's important to have an LTE filter tuned to filter out, block, a low pass filter that passes 608 megahertz and below. But even then, channels 14 through 17 are really poor performers. You will find pretty much they're always low power and, in my opinion, junk, jewelry TV, stuff like that, religious on those channels, because they're disfavored. 18 is the first good channel up through 36.
Joe, do you know your attitude and longitude? I'd be interested to look it up on one of these antenna apps and see what it says.
Yeah, let me look and find that. Let me say about that 12. I grew up with 12 from the 50s. All we had was 12, and it was always very good. You could use anything for an antenna. Anywhere around Binghamton, the whole greater Binghamton area, it came in good. It came in well, and it's like you could be out of town. I had an uncle that was rural, quite a ways out, and they could get that channel so it was watchable, a little snowy, and nothing else. So it's very true on that frequency. That 12 was the best one I guess we had. Now let's see, to uh look up my longitude and latitude. Is if I had my GPS thing charged up here, which it probably isn't. That tells me where I am. I should be able to do this. Like
Even the compass on an iPhone, I'm not sure about Android, but the compass,
I don't have that.
yeah, the native compass app built into an iPhone will give you your coordinates.
I can get on here and the map thing. Let's see if that tells you something here. Because I'm online now, of course. Have a look here.
Those 50s TVs I thought were kind of interesting that were shown earlier, of course, not of collector value, but to me, that's something that'd be kind of neat to have maybe one of those in the kitchen. Of course, any old CRT being fed by either a VCR or even a current modern digital tuner is going to be feeding the TV with an RF modulator on either channel 3 or channel 4. So even if it was a TV that didn't have a UHF tuner that's a 50s TV, they still could serve a purpose for conversation piece in a library, or a certain room in the house, a talk room. We sit down and chat, or a kitchen, and it'd be kind of a novelty to have a 15-inch black and white set in a kitchen kind of. But again, they're all just being powered off RF modulator on VHF low channel 3 or 4.
Yeah, the color set behind me is 1957 model CTC5 chassis built in 1956, and it's a bit rare because it does have a UHF tuner. So I've got a Chinese digital converter box that also has a USB port, so you can put JPEG files or MPEG-4 videos on that box and play them through the TV. And I use the UHF input with again a cheap UHF modulator that covers the whole UHF band, I think all the way up to the original allocation. And I use that to modulate a DVD player.
Yeah, the manufacturers, a lot of them did not want to put UHF tuner even after 1952 into the sets when the broadcasting began, to save money. And that was another disadvantage for investing in a station in UHF. And then Congress actually passed a law, I think it was in 1964, called the All Frequency Act or something of that along those lines, to force all sets to have both bands, so that the stations could survive and begin to grow and make it. So that's kind of neat that you have a color set from that vintage 56. Not only that, in color. And I do have a question. I see the boo to you on the screen now. Is is that filled in with the computer, or is that set really displaying that right now?
Really displaying it.
It looks fantastic.
For the past several years, I've been my other hobby is photography. So for the past several years, I've been creating holiday graphics to show on the set, and then I also may decorate around the set. As you see there, I have a spider web, and so I send out holiday greetings with the set actually displaying a picture. And the other thing when I take these pictures is I use the same technique that I learned from watching the people producing commercials for Motorola and Zenith, and that is I do a double exposure with the room lights on and the room lights off to get the picture that's not washed out. So you may recall like back in the 70s or so, magazines ads that said actual TV picture. And that was true, but what they didn't tell you is that actual picture was taken with the room lights off.
Well, I knew that set because of the shape of the having the round tube behind you puts it between, well, if it's color, it would have been manufactured in late 53 or more likely 54 all the way through 63 because the color rectangular tubes came out in 64.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I saw color broadcast, I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. The neighbors had a set, much like behind you, with, I called it the funny shaped screen when I told my folks, but it was the Flintstones in color, and I was blown away.
The first time that I saw color was at the Science Museum in Chicago. They had a see yourself on color TV exhibit sponsored by RCA. And they had one of the worst color TV cameras ever made, which was a 3 Vidicon camera that was sold for use as a medical closed circuit camera and sold to the military as a closed circuit camera. So the lighting was almost unbearable, and still the picture was terribly laggy. And when you stood under that bank of lights, you practically couldn't see yourself. People around could see the image, but it was awful hard to see what was on the monitor. And but it was still amazing.
Wayne, did you say earlier that you worked for Zenith?
Yes.
So in Chicago then?
Well, the suburbs.
Is that I have many AM Zenith sets, Tombstone, tabletop, and I've never come across a Zenith set that did not work.
That's what I see online often is people say that. But of course, being hand wired and so forth. They were built like tanks, but it's also true that, Zenith and RCA tend to use higher quality components than some of the others because they could get them cheaper since they were the big users of them. They could get quantity discounts on higher quality stuff. Before working for Zenith, I worked for Motorola. And just to give you an example, the lab at Motorola stocked 10% resistors regularly, 5% were special. Over at Zenith, the regular stock was 5%.
For what, resistors and capacitors?
Yeah, for resistors.
Do they ever use tantalum capacitors?
Can't tell you. I don't think so, but I'm not sure. And I built some prototype circuits with tantalum capacitors, and I learned very quickly about not ever reversing the polarity on them because they would their leakage would just go through the roof. They were just ruined if you ever reverse polarity.
The first transistor radio was the TR1 by Regency in the United States, and it used a 22.5 volt battery that was cylindrical, made up of multiple coin cells to achieve that voltage. That battery in I think it was 1954 at Christmas when it made its debut, that battery was $595 back then. That'd be, pretty darn expensive in today's dollars. So
what year?
I think it came out in October of 54 for the Christmas market in 1954.
I recently looked up the general inflation from 64 because that relates to one of my other hobbies is New York World's Fair memorabilia. But the inflation has been almost exactly 10 times since 1964. So that $5 or $6 battery would be $60 today.
It was a real impediment to sales. So within 3 years, other sets hit the market. And Sony even made one using, I think, a 9 volt battery. But Zenith came out with a series of portable AM radios. They're really more a pocket radio, a coat pocket radio, not a shirt pocket radio. But they called them the Owl Eye series, and there were different versions of them. I think I have a 1955 or 56 Owl Eye set Zenith with germanium transistors. And by today's standards, with the filters and everything that's in it, that radio sounds fantastic.
I had a little small RCA radio, and it had a weird battery in it, a weird size battery with a weird voltage, and I can't remember what it was. Doesn't sound like it was that high, but it was different, cost more. Then I had an RCA that took 2 or 3 C cells, and that was pretty good. It was a good sized radio, but the batteries would last a long time in it. It was probably 2 C cells.
So have you found your location?
Yeah, I found the coordinates here.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me jump over to that. Got a lot of things going here. This one here.
Okay, I'm going over to rabbitears.info and we'll see what this does.
I think Rabbit Ears is the best site of the group of 10 at this point in
I
time.
agree. It's
TV
just
Fool was the best, but
it's
most of the
just
data post repack is old. So Rabbit Ears is the go-to today.
yeah, rabbitears.info is still a little user unfriendly to me, but at least it's got a learning curve to it to find the page you're looking for. But let's see. Wait. I forget if it takes the minus sign correctly, but we'll find out. Yep, I went to New York. Here we are. Well, this is not too promising. It says two stations in Ithaca and one in Syracuse have fair field strength, 76 to 63 dB microvolts per meter. And all the other listings are poor or bad.
That'd be tough. Anything below 50 is really tough.
Yeah. So I would say don't waste your time and money trying to put up an antenna for digital TV.
Well, from all I knew about it, it confirms that.
Yeah, the interesting thing is one of the Ithaca ones is only 16 miles away, but it must be as the mole digs and not as the crow flies.
If it's that hilly at your location, is your home heating provided by oil tank on site? It's difficult to put, for example, I know in Connecticut, my sister used to live there. The terrain is so rocky, you can't put in natural gas lines. She had a new modern home built that had to have fuel oil. How do you heat out there in New York where it's hilly?
We do have gas lines near here, and there's not a problem with Rocky, and you just don't have a gas line here. Well, my house is all electric. I have 10 thermostats in my home. Just baseboard heating. I do have a wood stove in the big room, and I use that when it gets below 20 degrees sometimes for the fun of it. But a lot of people have propane here other than oil.
And that's also portable and deliverable, but that costs 2 times what natural gas is.
Oh yeah, you got to get gas. Like just a mile from here, they have gas. I know our fire station here, they put that in years ago, and they have it in a local hamlet nearby here. So it's not that far away. It just like, this is rural. Like on one side of me, there's a field where the farmers grow food for the cattle and for the cows. And on the, well, I got 42 acres, so there's like nothing around me. I'm not far away from anything. It's a suburban really, but it's considered rural.
According to my calculations, electric, from where you generate the heat to spin the steam turbine and make the electricity to distributing it to the end user, it's a factor of 2.68. In other words, if you generate 2.68 kilowatts, you get 1 kilowatt out
Well,
pipeline.
you know, that's something we used
So,
to have. we
so
used-
your heat bills must be $700-800 during the coldest part of the winter.
Well, they get up there. The what is it? How much? 15 cents a kilowatt hour, something like that. But I could burn some wood. I have wood on the property if I want to monkey around. I get somebody cut it up for me. And also, like, I'm alone, and my wife died about a year ago, and we kept things a lot warmer. She always had everything warm. She had like about 4 heating pads, electric blankets, and everything else. And so now I keep it somewhat cooler. I could see the difference from a year ago. Like I said, I just heat the room I'm in, basically. It's just that flexible. So basically keep the place down to 60. And then wherever I want to be for a while, I'll turn it up. And it holds, it's well insulated, like for electric. But there's also no power plant here anymore. There used to be one a few miles away, but now they've shut down, and it was a coal plant. They've shut down about a half a dozen coal plants in upstate New York here.
15 cents a kilowatt hour sounds about 2 or 3 years old for data. And well, our local power company they just talk about the raw power, but you know, there's distribution, there's a whole second half of the bill. So the way I look at it is your checkbook only knows how many kilowatt hours you consumed and how many dollars it had to pay to get them.
What I do,
So when I divide the two, and we're really in Metro Detroit running more around 18.5 cents a kilowatt hour, and they about a year ago instituted a time of day between 3 p.m. And 7 p.m. A higher tier rate, which is about 21.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So
I used to have a day night thing, okay, and it used to be very advantageous, but it's not anymore. So I got off from it. But I'll look at the bill here because you got.
I have natural gas, and I do the same thing you're doing because I live alone. I heat the house, even though I have natural gas. I heat it base load is 60 degrees, and I'll use supplement electric heat in the 1 or 2 rooms I'm in most. And then I can heat those rooms up comfortably 72, 74, 76, and have overall a reasonable bill rather than trying to heat the whole house at some higher number.
Well, during the summer, it's practically next to nothing. Now, my latest bill here is $74, okay, for 30 days. And that's for everything. Now, see, you look at the different charges here. Now, see, I did a calculation here, and the thing is, you pay $19 just for the meter charge or billing charge, okay? So if I take everything in there, like the taxes and stuff, then it came out to like 24 cents a kilowatt hour. But that's because of the low usage. Now, when you get high, in other words, that becomes less significant. But looking at the delivery charge is like, almost 8 cents. And the energy charge was like 7 cents. And the energy varies and the delivery stays the same. And then you got 2 and 4% sales tax. And then
that's what I'm talking about. You know, there are all these different line items, but your checkbook doesn't know your checkbook does not know they exist.
So
it doesn't know about the customer charge and taxes. So if you just divide the kilowatt hours into the dollars, you're going to find out you're paying probably somewhere around 21 to 25 cents a kilowatt hour. People are really misled by the bill.
Like I say, the only thing you take out is you take out the $19, you know, that's a fixed charge every month, and all the others vary all over the place.
Don't take it out. Just divide the two numbers.
No, what I'm saying is, okay, because that's a fixed charge here, like I only used 311 kilowatt hours, okay? So when I start using like 2,000 kilowatt hours, that becomes insignificant. See, that would knock it down, like talking everything, that's 23.9 cents, okay, for the month. And if you put that aside and then added it back in, it'd be less than that. It's the same thing last month, and it gets, that's 22.9 in the summer, 22.1, 20.1. The the highest is in the summertime when it's hot or very cold. Then it gets much higher. But you get an in-between time when the energy use gets less, so you got all that. But it's gone up considerably over the last year or two. Like what they're doing is building transmission. We don't have the generating channels, generating plants, so they got to build a lot of transmission to bring it in from wherever they can find it. I think that's happening all over.
Yeah, they want to shut all the coal plants down. It's not politically proper these days.
Well, it's, you know, it's the worst thing you could have, you know. Now we had one of the best, I used to work for the utility, and we had one of the best, most efficient, cleanest coal plants anywhere here. And that was the last to go, you know. And but it's all this kind of thing about getting away from the coal and the oil and stuff that. And we were going to have a nuclear plant here years ago, and it just didn't. They never got it built. It was bitching about that. So
3 Mile Island is back online, but they sell all their power to a single company.
well, you know what happened too is they decided that the utility should have competition. So they let anybody generate power. And this was when we're generating with coal. So people went out and built power plants that were running on natural gas, and the utility had to pay more than what it was worth just to create the competition. And a lot of those plants came and went. And then later, the utility had to sell all of the generating plants, you know, so it's just a delivery company. And anybody generates, you get it where you can, and anybody can generate power. So
Like Enron.
yeah, well, Enron, you know, I remember when that was going on, you know, and the company used to be pretty open and have meetings and tell us stuff. And they said, well, you know, things like Enron, look at them, because they say you'll be able to buy your power from any place in the country, you know. And I says, well, you can't transmit much further west than Ohio, you know. And they said, well, that's essentially true, but it works on paper, you know. And I look at our Enron and I said, well, something doesn't add up there. You know, it's going in circles and stuff. But yeah, it did. It ruined the company. I mean, it's just a foolishness of buying and selling, you know. And now we have, like, you can choose from like 30 different people to supply your power, and it's nuts. You know, that was crazy to do that. And also the company, New York State Electric and Gas, was sold to a company in Spain for cash. Because I had a lot of stock in it, and you couldn't keep it. It had to be bought by them. I got more than I ever would have, but I don't have the dividends anymore. So
They forced you to tender your shares.
yes. Now there was another utility used to be called Niagara Mohawk, and that became National Grid, and that they kept the stock in that, you know, just converted the thing. But when NYSEG, it was sold outright. Well, the idea was Iberdrola, their expertise is wind power. So the idea was they're going to come in and set up their wind turbines, and tie into the grid, and everything was going to be happy. And we got a number of we got a lot of solar, and we got a lot of wind power here, and there's going to be more of it, I'm sure. That they got a few places with big batteries. Everything's changing. But with selling things off, well, I guess it was good they were able to unload it, because if they had to get rid of the power plants anyway, somebody else got stuck with them. There was one in Binghamton that got abandoned. You know, people are going in there stealing stuff, pipes and things. I've been trying to get back here where I was, and I haven't been able to do it so far.
Well, I think I'm about to fold up my tent. So good night, all.
Me too. Good night, everybody.
But I'm going to get back in. Somebody's still there.